Welcome to Rome of the West, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm your host, Mike Burke, and we have a very special guest today, Steve LeMire, all the way from Orange County, California. How you doing, Steve?
Very good, Mike.
Good.
Pleased to be here.
Well, we get to talk about some interesting things today, but really the main theme is how to recognize God in your life. But before we get into that, tell us about yourself.
Okay. I'm the father of 5 children, one of whom we lost before birth. I'm married to a beautiful Peruvian woman, and I come from a family, I'm a cradle Catholic. I come from a family where my father was a deacon in the church, an ordained deacon, and my mother practically lived inside a church. I mean, she was there all the time. So my background is a lot different than most people, a lot of people today, in that I was handed on the faith. And I thank God for the background that I've had.
So a real strong foundation in the faith.
Right.
That's wonderful. Now again, before we get into some of the meat and potatoes here, did you always feel connected to God?
Yes, I think I did. I think there was a time, maybe like 20, 30 years ago, where I was drifting. But as a child, you know, I remember very strongly my first communion and how I felt and things like that. And then I kind of drifted. And then when I started having children, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. How am I leading my life? What kind of an example am I setting? And that's when I started coming back. Somehow I got connected in with St. Joseph Radio, and from there, it's very strong.
Excellent. So we're already seeing that some influence in your life helped connect you back with God. Some, not necessarily coincidence, your children aren't coincidences,
No.
but something that you talk a lot about and feel strongly about are these things that we many times call coincidence.
Exactly.
That really might not be coincidence at all, but Godincidence?
That's what my dad used to like to call them, yes.
That's great.
And you know, it took me a while. It's almost like God was beating me over the head with some of these. A lot of them are just little everyday things that you don't think about. And I think it's important that we do start looking for God in the little things. Some of them were very major. In fact, the one that triggered my desire to actually start writing these things down so that my family would remember them actually happened here in St. Louis.
Oh, no kidding.
No kidding.
Well, let's start there.
Let's start
what was
there.
going on?
Okay, we were traveling cross country. I didn't mention that one of my boys is handicapped.
Okay.
And
this is Andre?
Andre.
Okay.
Right. And so in order to have a wheelchair accessible vehicle available to us on a vacation, sometimes we will drive. And we were driving through St. Louis. We stopped one Saturday night for dinner and decided, it was getting too late. We tried calling for hotel rooms farther down the road, and they go, no, we're all booked. And I go, well, this is strange. So we said, okay, we just passed a hotel, so we'll go back there. And they had plenty of room, so we were set for the weekend. Since it was a Saturday night, my son said, Dad, you got to find out what time Mass is in the morning. And there were a couple churches listed in the hotel directory. And so the next morning I called one of them, just picked one of them sort of at random, and called over, got an answering machine message that said when the Mass times were. We picked a kind of a late one, so we had time to get Andre ready.
Sure.
And then went down to the desk and asked for if they could give me directions, and the desk clerk had never heard of the place.
Okay.
But he agreed that he could go online and get directions for us. So we walked out and we got to Mass just as Mass was starting. Sat down, they told us where to go with the wheelchair, very nice people.
Okay.
And we walked in and then went through the Mass. I've got to say, I thought the homily was great. I still remember it to this day. And then after Mass, my son said that the priest reminded him of one of my brothers. And I go, no, maybe one of the priests from St. Michael's Abbey in California. But we walked out of church, and the priest was out in front talking to the congregation. So I go, well, okay, we should just go talk to him. So we went up, and I said, yeah, we're on our way back to California. And he goes, oh, last time I was there, I was in Anaheim. Oh, gee, I wasn't expecting that, but so was that. Yeah, I said, well, yeah, we're from Irvine, which is another major city in Orange County. And he says, oh, St. John Newman? And now I'm getting kind of freaked out because he knows.
You're getting closer to home.
Closer to home, but we no longer attended St. John Newman because they split the parish off, and we were, like I like to say, on the wrong side of the tracks.
Okay.
The railroad tracks were the dividing line.
Okay.
So he said, oh, that's, he mentions my pastor by name. I'm going, what's going on here? And then, I said, I tell people, I felt like I was on the road to Emmaus, because as soon as he mentioned my pastor by name, I knew who the priest was.
All right.
And it turned out that he had been stationed in Orange County for a while. In fact, he had been an associate under my pastor at a previous church. And I had even met him. And, actually, I think I had met him twice.
And now, did you make this connection with him? And did you talk about this connection you had?
Well, yes, very, very briefly. I mean, he's talking to his congregation.
Sure.
I felt a little uncomfortable interrupting.
Yeah.
But I was just blown away. And so we had a nice talk, and and then I went back home and went to my pastor, and I said, you'll never guess who I ran into. So.
And he was probably really glad to hear
Mm-hmm.
that you had run into Father, and
Right.
and he was doing well.
Yes, and apparently he is doing very well.
Yes. He was at our parish, at my parish, before moving to his new one as pastor.
Oh.
And from personal experience, I can see why you would remember him. He's just a wonderful priest.
Yeah.
Does that speak to you about the connectivity that our faith can provide us?
Well, it does. It's more like, that God was sending me to make the connection back to the people back in Orange County. He has a lot of people back there that are very fond of him, and from personal experience why that would be. Excellent priest.
And, Father had a lot of work ahead of him there at that parish. And I would imagine seeing someone back from home was a little gift to him. Perhaps you were a little gift from God to Father.
I don't know about that.
But it's certainly the faith that ties us all together, and you would want to say hello to him. Oh, that is a great story. And you're how many thousands of miles away from home?
No, it's probably about 1,500.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to run into anybody I knew. Well, yeah.
That's great. So were you always able to see this God in these moments, whether they're very large moments, good or bad moments?
I don't think so. Like I said, this last story was the one that started me really going, wait a minute, God's trying to get my attention. It's not the only major event like that that's happened. Maybe we'll talk about some of those later. But it's really in the small things that are some of the most important.
Mm-hmm. What do you think allowed you to start recognizing these things as God's will?
I think God was just beating me over the head with them.
Well, He needs to do that to a lot of us.
Yeah, when I started writing them down, I would talk to a coworker, and it suddenly hit me that I had forgotten all about an event that happened 20 years ago with her, and so as I started writing these down, more and more I started to see other events that I wouldn't have thought about. So the big things helped, and then actually documenting them kind of led me to start looking, and I started telling everybody else, hey, you need to look at where God's working in your life.
Yeah. They often say a journal or a diary really helps you reflect on the day and remember things right. And so writing these things down could be a tremendous way to reconnect with God and then be looking for those moments.
Right.
Do you have an example for us of God's humor in your life?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I have a friend also named Mike who would spend his Saturdays down at an abortion mill trying to sidelock counsel and save babies. And I don't know if you've ever been down in front of one of those places, but it's not a fun place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So he's down there, he's doing God's work. But one day, one of the workers at the abortion place was having his car detailed. And my friend Mike got a little sarcastic and said, gee, wouldn't it be a shame if after this car was detailed and it was looking real nice, a bird would fly over it and drop on it. Okay. And yeah, sure enough, within minutes, here comes a bird. And people would say, yeah, that's not God. But Mike thought it was because the bird had fantastic aim. The problem was that the aim was on top of Mike's head. So yeah, God has a sense of humor. I'm sure he was very grateful that Mike was out there trying to do his will. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it reminded me of the stories of the apostles wanting to call down fire from heaven.
Okay.
And Jesus says, "You don't know what you're asking for." But Mike said, he was instantly convicted of his offense. That's the way he worded it.
So he was not being very humble.
Well, he was being self-righteous, I would say.
Okay.
And so God was telling him, no, I'm glad you're here, but do it my way.
If he wasn't centered with Christ in his life, he would not recognize that moment as a moment to learn from.
Right.
I would think.
Yeah.
It would just be a pure thing that happened,
mm-hmm.
but yet since he's centered on Christ, he's like, it brings him back to...
And like I said, he said immediately he was convicted of his offense.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like family is a huge part of these stories that you write about, and maybe even particularly with Andre and his challenges. Can't be an easy thing for a family to embrace and deal with. Does he bring the family these special stories?
Well, he's involved in a lot of them, but in a lot of ways, it's what he brings us to the point where everyone in the family is affected by him. Somebody has to be with him at all times and things like that. So in many ways, he's taught us to be less selfish. Mm-hmm. And so from that perspective, that's really the big thing. But there are stories, maybe this is a time to talk about the bus.
The bus?
The bus.
All right.
Okay. Several years ago, my wife decided that we needed to go on a family pilgrimage. And she really wanted to take him to Lourdes. And I didn't really like the thought of flying across the ocean with Andre and the physical care that on an airplane. How do we take care of him? So I said, well, maybe we can find someplace closer. So she talked about Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mexico City, and then she mentioned the St. Joseph Oratory in Montreal. And that really appealed to me because St. Joseph Oratory was the home of blessed, now Saint Andre Bessette.
Okay.
Andre. Oh, okay. There's also a story in our background of Blessed Andre healing another one of the LeMire clan, a distant relative.
Okay.
So I thought, and I'd been to Canada many times as a young man. So we chose to go to Montreal, and this was one of the times that we were driving because we needed the car. So we finally got to Montreal one afternoon, and we found the oratory very easily. It's right on Mount Royal, so it kind of stands out. And we drove up there, walked around for about a couple hours. And they were about to close, so we were leaving. And the kids decided, okay, it's time to go home now. And my wife said, no, we're on a pilgrimage. We're going to be, we're going to stay here. So we went out and got in a hotel room. We had to go all the way out by the airport in order to find one. So we had to trek back into town the next morning. We got up and plotted the route out with a map and did all kinds of things. And the only reason I mention this is because I'm trying to say, okay, we were having our plans and God had some other plans.
Okay.
So we drove into town. We ended up back in a construction zone, which I was trying to avoid. We drove, we got off the freeway. We ended up in a detour. We drove
Construction zones are not God's work.
But he uses them. So we go through the detour. We turn onto Queen Mary Street, which is where the oratory is located. And I'm about to mention, point out a street name that we're crossing, and my eye catches a city bus. And I couldn't believe it. I said, look at that bus. So we drove on. The bus stopped to pick up passengers, fortunately. We pulled into the driveway of St. Joseph Oratory. Practically literally, pushed my wife out of the car with a camera, and she went and got a picture of this bus as it was loading passengers in front of it. And on the back of the bus, in big letters, is the name LeMire.
Okay.
And on top of that is a big smiley face. And I'm going, whoa, God's timing.
How appropriate.
How appropriate is right.
Yeah. Well, I think many people find that when they are striving to God, taking steps to Him, that these coincidences increase in number.
Right.
And I don't think it's any oddity that it would happen as you're making a pilgrimage from very far away
Right.
and asking for a saint to help with Andre's life, that God would give you a little sign that you're doing the right thing.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And interesting that Saint Andre and your son have that. Was that planned, or was your wife looking for just a place to go like Lourdes?
It was more the latter. She was really interested in going to pray for Andre.
Okay.
I think we view Andre as a reminder for us to pray.
Okay. Yeah, a beautiful reminder to pray, and that we all need that. I've had the experience of people praying for me, and it's so humbling.
Oh, yes.
To think that people are taking their time out of the day to pray for you. And I think as family, we maybe expect that out of our family, but our extended parish and others beyond that is that connection that I feel to the faith. That's pretty good. A random bus.
Just a city bus.
Now, how do these Godincidents bring you closer to God?
Well, it's a reminder always that he's always there. I think we, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think we in general have a tendency to want to do it ourselves. Famous idea of men wanting to conquer the road, as we've been doing the last few days to get here. But God works with the humble, and He wants us to always call out to Him, and not to, well, I guess it was St. Augustine, was it, who said, pray as if everything depended on God, and work as if everything depended on you.
Okay.
And I think sometimes we forget the first part.
Sure.
And that we want to do it, and there's a pride factor in there, and things like that.
So when you see these little moments, it draws you closer to God because it reminds you that He is always there.
Right.
And it could be something as small as a bus driving across town, or more larger things that happen to us in life. Tell us about your passport story. Because this seemingly is a small detail, but could be
Oh, it's
a big deal.
it was a crisis in my mind, I'll tell you. Many years ago, I was sent on a business trip to Germany, and I took actually my family only consisted of my wife and my daughter at the time, so I took my family with us, and we flew nonstop to Frankfurt. I think it was 11 hours. We got there, we were very tired. We had to rent a car, and in order to rent the car, I needed my passport. So I got my passport out, rented the car, then we drove to the hotel. The hotel also wanted my passport.
Okay.
And at that time, I looked in my bag, and it wasn't there. And in talking to everybody, we determined that I had taken it out of this package that I had all my papers in, and then left that package in a luggage cart in the airport. So we got in their cars and drove back to the airport and tore the place apart. We looked everywhere, nothing. So we went back to the hotel, and I got on my knees, maybe literally on my knees. I don't remember that part. And then I did something that, having gone to Catholic school, all the way through high school, I was taught not to do, is I made a deal with God.
Aha.
And that wasn't, may not be the right thing to do, but at least God knew He had my attention. The next day, I made a trip down to the American consulate, and first reaction I got there was, "Oh no, the sky is falling," type of thing. Then I actually talked to one of the assistant consuls, and he said, "Don't worry about it, we'll get you home." And he gave me some temporary paperwork so that they wouldn't throw us in jail or whatever. And then we went on with our vacation, but we were stuck in Germany then. The plans were, we had some coworkers that went to Austria, and the whole group went to France. We were stuck in Germany. But we spent the weekend down in Oberammergau, which is very famous for its passion play. And then, and I didn't mention, we had arrived on Tuesday of Holy Week, and then spent Easter Sunday in Oberammergau. The following day, Monday, everybody else hopped in the cars and went to France. We went to the train station, took a train back to Frankfurt. And when we got there, we found out that somebody had found the passports. In fact, somebody on Easter Sunday had found the passports. And it happened to be a Colombian woman who was flying through Frankfurt, and she noticed my wife's Peruvian passport. So she wrote a little note in Spanish and turned it into the authorities. And we got all of our paperwork back.
Nice.
And, big relief.
Yeah.
And then
You could get out of Germany at that point.
I could get out of Germany. My daughter wouldn't be stopped at the border for not having papers.
Right.
But then I remembered something that the nuns taught me. They said, if you're going to ignore our advice and make a deal with God,
Yeah.
make sure you meet your commitment.
Ah, yes.
That part I did. So that was the story.
So a deal with God. He probably knew your heart was in the right place.
I hope so. I might hear about it someday.
Yeah. Well, a covenant is a sort of deal,
It is.
Yeah.
But usually God is the one dictating the covenant.
This is true. And whether the deal you like or not, you're going to get some end of it, right?
That's right.
So you made the best of the situation, and, well, you prayed right off the bat.
I prayed, probably the most fervent prayer in my life. Yeah.
And it seemingly was answered.
Very, very definitely.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well, that being a long way from home can create a lot of anxiety that way.
Yes.
And looking for those passports just would be terrifying. I couldn't imagine. And plus, you're stuck in Germany. You can't make the rest of the trip.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I like to look at it from this perspective. I mean, those passports were literally lost in one of the world's busiest airports for 5 days.
Okay.
And how they survived for 5 days it is beyond me.
I would say we have one of your father's Godincidence, don't we?
Exactly.
Gotcha. You shared with me a little earlier about a little story about a coworker, and I like it on several levels, because one, it kind of deals with your emotions, and again, prayer, which is obviously very important in your life. Can you tell us about her?
I'm not actually sure which story you're talking about. I'm sorry.
You were really had some difficulty at work.
Okay.
Trying to work
Okay,
through this
that one.
this
Okay.
problem.
Okay. There was a problem I was having at work. I'm in computer business, and I was working on a problem where every 36 hours my machine would die.
Okay.
And it took 36 hours to happen, so it took a long time. I was working on this problem for 2 weeks, and I was working night and day, couldn't figure it out. And so one night, I took a break, and my wife and I attended a weekly prayer meeting. And while I was praying, I was actually praying not about that problem so much, but about this anger I was having with a coworker. And I actually was literally asking God to take the anger away from me. I have no idea what I was angry about, but I remember I was angry. And while I was praying that, the answer came to the problem I was having. All of a sudden, it was almost like the Father John Paul thing, where where suddenly I just knew the answer. It was like divine inspiration.
Okay.
And so I announced afterwards that I was going to go back to work after the meeting, and my wife looked at me and go, what are you talking about? I go, no, I was going to go anyway, because the 36 hours is up around midnight, and I want to be there when it fails. But now I actually know what the answer is. I went to the office after the meeting, and while I was waiting for the failure, I wrote up a little experiment, and sure enough, I could make it happen in seconds.
Nice.
And so I knew the answer was right.
Well, we'll be back in just a few moments with Steve LeMire, and we're going to be talking about more stories and how to recognize God in your life. We are back with Steve LeMire, and you're watching Rome of the West, coming from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm your host, Michael Burke, and Steve has come all the way from California to share just some simply beautiful stories about God in his life, and we're going to pick up right there.
Okay.
And we have a really kind of neat story about some nuns, I believe it is.
Oh, okay. Yes, the nuns. One night we were invited to a costume party and a friend's house, and my wife being from South America, we dressed up as South American gauchos. And we get to the party, and we're walking around, and we run into some other gauchos, and it's like, wait a minute. You know,
How does this happen?
Yeah, who would dress as South American gauchos? So it turned out it was the parents of our hostess. And so we talked to them for quite a bit, and it turned out that one of their daughters had entered a convent in New Mexico. And they started talking. I said, oh, gee, that's the same convent as some other friends have a daughter in. And I mentioned the name, and the mother looks at me with a very strange look on her face and says, how do you spell that? And she said, that's the name of a man who was our choir director back 40, 50 years ago. Could it be the same person? And we kept talking, and his wife's name is, and went on and on and on, and sure enough, these people had known each other 50 years ago, and in fact, she said he sang at her wedding.
Oh my gosh.
And so we had and then she asked for the address or phone number, and I didn't have it with me, so I called them the next day to say, hey, this is what's happened. Do you mind if I give out your phone number? And he says, don't worry about it. She's already called me. She got a hold of it just from the description of the neighborhood that I gave her about where he lived. And so, yeah, so, I just thought it was, so strange. First of all, the costumes being the same, that was just a hook, I guess.
Right.
And we were instrumental in hooking two families together that had grown apart over the decades, and their daughters were living in the same convent, 2 states away.
That's right. So we definitely have a connection there. Mm-hmm. And you'd mentioned the word instrumental.
Yes.
And you see you being and your family being instruments to help others, to even help God help others? Is that right? I understand that right?
I believe so. I mean, just as we are called to be mediators with, like with a small m, by praying for one another.
Yes.
God uses people to do His work. Like the bus driver up in Montreal. He is the bus driver.
That's right.
But there, I think it's important to look for ways not only for God to, inspire us and solve our problems, but to be instruments for others. It's part of the sharing the faith. Love one another.
And there's specific incidents having to do with a van.
Yeah. Okay.
That
right.
would illustrate that for us.
Right. This was another one that was just kind of a quote unquote coincidence, mm-hmm. But we mentioned Andre and having we have a wheelchair accessible van. And we were getting tired of it, and we decided that we needed a new one. We went out and bought a new one. We could have traded in the old one. We could have sold it. They're very valuable, mm-hmm. even old models, because of the conversion. But we said, no, we'd like to donate it. And living in Orange County, we're very blessed to have in the county St. Michael's Abbey, Norbertine Fathers. And a lot of the Norbertine Fathers are getting up in years. And so I said, maybe they could use a van. And so my wife called the Abbey, left a message for the priest who does that kind of work for them. And he happened to be out of town giving a retreat to a group of nuns, like in Alabama or Arkansas, something like that. And while he was there, he saw that they had a van where they had a back seat that actually would come out so that the elderly nuns could get on the seat easily and then pull them back into the van. He remarked how they could use one of those at the Abbey. And then one of the sisters said, no, what you really need is a wheelchair accessible van. He got back to the Abbey. Here's a message from my wife that says, we want to give him one. So, he came over like 2 days later with the paperwork and drove off with our van.
Yeah, so simply by following Christ's instructions on charity, mm-hmm. and you fell right into that, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We had no idea, well, we knew they could use the van, but the rest of the story came as a complete surprise.
Yeah, it's amazing how it just falls right into place.
Mm-hmm.
Right when someone needs it, there you are.
That's right.
And sometimes we get knocks on our door from strangers.
And
yes,
we do.
Many times we have to exercise our virtues of patience and understanding, and particularly when it comes to our faith and defending our faith.
Right. Yeah. One Saturday, it happened to be the Saturday before Christmas, a decade ago. I was getting Andre ready for the day. He needs total care. And my wife happened to ask me a question or something. I looked up and Andre rolled off the bed. And I see that happening. I go to catch him and I end up hurting my back. Yeah, it's, he's not the biggest kid in the world, but he's an adult size. So it's a Saturday and my back is hurting. It's Christmas. I'm worried about, what am I going to be like for Christmas? And my wife suggests a chiropractor that she had gone to recently or something. So I got an appointment. It was just, even though it was a Saturday, he was there, so I got an appointment. About 20 minutes before that appointment, knock on the door. And it's a group of Jehovah's Witnesses. Since I'm kind of not moving very quickly, my son Mark answered the door and saw who it was. I made it to the door, and while I'm beginning the conversation with him, Mark's running to a bookshelf, grabbing a Bible,
Okay.
come back and do battle. Now the cute thing about this is that
Now, did you send him
No.
to go get the Bible?
not at all.
So Mark does this on his own.
Does it on his own.
All right.
And the part that I haven't mentioned yet is Mark is 8 years old at the time.
Okay.
So, you hear a lot of stories about when people come to the door, people pretend they're not home or whatever.
Right.
No, not the right thing to do.
So you intentionally answered the door
Absolutely.
and intentionally furthered the conversation.
Right.
that was
now
coming
I had
your
an
way.
appointment that I didn't want to miss because I didn't want to spend Christmas on my back.
Hobbled, yeah.
So I had to beg off. But while we were talking, Mark would come back and start trying to begin the debate.
Okay.
So I had to excuse him. He said, excuse myself that I had to go. I had an appointment, but we'd like to talk to him later. And they said they would be back the next week. So I happened to take Mark with me to the chiropractor while I was in the waiting room. He starts listing all these Bible verses that he wants to use with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
And they were all legitimate verses for that purpose. Well, this is impressive. This really ties into the previous story, though, because I can't take the credit for his knowledge and whatever.
Okay.
He was homeschooled. Part of our homeschooling, one of the fathers from St. Michael's Abbey that I just mentioned taught them religion. And he
Okay.
actually, that year, had role-played different religious groups and how to address their points.
Okay.
So he was prepared.
I would say.
Yeah. So then, the funny part of the story is a few days later, I went over to St. Joseph Radio's offices for some reason, and I was bragging about my son, and there was a customer there who heard my story and somehow that told her that I was a Bible expert. I am
Okay.
not a Bible expert. But she said, she asked me, where in the Bible does it talk about Jesus spitting people out of his mouth?
Okay.
And I'm so relieved because I go, I'm not a Bible expert, but you hit one of my favorite verses. I know that one. So I told her it's in Revelation chapter 3, and I made it look like I really was a Bible expert.
Right.
Yeah.
You had the answer.
I had the answer, and it could have been anything else, and I would have been dumbfounded probably.
It seems that God wants people in our lives at those moments.
Mhm.
You're not a Bible expert, but you knew. How rare would it be that someone would know that passage that isn't a study in the religious life? So for you to be there is tremendous, and we see this all the time with Father Hopping for myself. As I was re-embracing the faith, I had to go to confession first.
Right.
Before I took any step, I knew that had to happen.
Right.
So I went up to church one night to get a bulletin to see when confession times.
Right.
And it was dark and it was a little cold out, and he was there. And he guided me through
Right.
those first steps of coming back.
Right.
He just happened to be waiting for someone to come to dinner, but I happened to be right there at that moment. It was my
Exactly.
time coming to Christ.
Exactly.
And he put someone right in my path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we see that a lot.
We see it if we look.
Well, this is true. You can deny that. And he said, before I got into my car on the parking lot, which is where we did all this,
Right.
he said, "Oh, Mike, by the way, this is no accident that I was here and that you were here
That's
at
right.
this very moment. And it really got me thinking about the very things you're talking about today. I never saw God in my life that directly until I started thinking about that moment.
Right.
And then that allowed me to continue to reflect on my whole life, growing up with some special needs and someone always being there. And it continues to happen. And it seems to happen with me. I don't know if it is with you, but as I take steps toward Christ, it happens. I think only very lucky are we when we're not working towards Him, that
Right.
He's going to really step out towards us, like He did with St. Paul.
Yeah, well, the story in Germany we talked about earlier in the last half hour, where at that time I would say that I wasn't striving towards Him. Although I did have with me on that trip a book about Fatima that I hadn't, I'd never read, and I said, okay, it's time to read. So maybe I was making a small step, but that was my life at the time. I was probably, lukewarm.
So your wife was taking the steps, and you were coming along.
That was true too.
But you weren't resisting either. You
No.
were taking that tiny little step, and maybe that's picking up a book. I see that with many of my friends at our parish. They might have been totally away from the church, or just cool about it.
Right.
And it seems to be the first thing that we all did was pick up a book, and it might have been about a particular saint they remembered as a child, or why Catholics do what Catholics do.
Why Catholics do. Right.
And this is where we start understanding God, and we can then start seeing Him in our life.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. Your children, I think we touched on it a little bit before, but they seem to always be involved in these coincidences, or at least many times helping you realize that God's in your life.
Right.
And I think about needing God's protection
Right.
and a story that you have regarding that.
Well, there are several stories because each one of my children, maybe even Andre would be the least of those, have experienced very dangerous situations and somehow were protected. One of the, what seems funny today, when my daughter went off to college, my wife arranged to have the daily mass said for her the day we were leaving to take her. And this was at a time when our parish was brand new. I mentioned earlier that we had split off.
Right.
And mass was in the rectory. There were probably only about 20 people there. And the priest, a very beloved Monsignor, announced that the mass intention was for Natalie LeMire, deceased.
Okay.
And we go, wait a minute, she's right here. And it was really funny because he was so embarrassed. I said, don't worry about it. It just gives me something to tease you about. You know?
Right.
And but we went off to school, took her to school. She was in the honors program, and they start at that school every year. The honors program starts with a retreat. So they were off for the weekend at a retreat. They were driving back. Well, let me put it this way. Let me back up a little bit. My wife and I agreed to go down to the school and meet her Sunday morning, and we'd take her to Mass. And there was a parents' convocation or incoming student convocation that day anyway, so we were going to be there. So we're driving back, and we come across an accident scene. There were 4 or 5 fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. I mean, the whole sky was lit up with flashing lights. And we drove through. They waved us through as quickly as possible. We got to her dorm, and she wasn't there. And after about 10 minutes, I remarked, gee, I hope they weren't in that accident. Well, it turns out they were. So now I'm going, well, now just 3 days earlier, we had to pray for Natalie LeMire, deceased. But I think maybe it was even because he made the mistake or whatever. But his prayers, our prayers for that Mass, protected her, and she came out relatively unscathed. She was quite a bit sore and whatever, but she walked away.
And do you ask beyond the Mass that was said for her, which certainly is would lend you to think that that brought her to some safety, but is there regular prayers of protection that you ask for your family?
Oh, I wish I could say I did it regularly. I do pray for my family. Do I pray enough? Well, Christ said pray unceasingly, right?
Right.
Yes, we do tend to pray for our children. In fact, earlier in the program you were asking about did I always find God and whatever, and was I leading a good Catholic faith life? And I actually credit my mom's prayers to that.
Okay.
Because she was, like I said earlier, she's always in church and praying for her children. She took her obligation as a mother very seriously before God.
I think one of our famous saints had a mother very concerned about
him.
him.
You think so?
I always think about Saint Monica.
Uh-huh.
She spent so many years not knowing whether Saint Augustine was going to come around, and her husband as well. And obviously we have Saint Augustine to thank for a lot of our clarity on our faith, and her husband converted as well. So I think we just have to remember to be patient, and I pray to her a lot for my family to keep us strong in our faith and keep us going. Do you have any particular saint that you connect with that way, or Mary?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just prayer to God.
So I want to go back, and you're probably going to get a little embarrassed.
Actually, I should back up though.
Okay.
This probably goes over well here, but one saint in particular that I do pray to is Saint Joseph.
There we go.
Because he's my patron as a father, and I try to remember that when I come up against a difficult family situation. Saint Joseph, help me here. What would you do in this situation, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because he had to leave his country, right?
He had not only leave his country, but he had one of the greatest responsibilities in the world, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right, and he didn't run away from that.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, and this might embarrass you a little bit, it's not my intention, but when Mark took the initiative to talk with the Jehovah's, how did that make you feel? And what were you thinking at that time?
Well, to be honest with you, it probably made me a little too proud.
Okay.
As I said, I was in the offices a few days later bragging about my son.
Yeah.
He doesn't like me telling the story, but I think it's important to know that if an 8-year-old can defend the faith, any adult should. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, get comfortable.
Yeah, we have to really just approach it as a conversation, because they're there trying to tell you about their faith. And for you to be confrontational right back, that's going to get us nowhere.
It does get us nowhere. I like to try to start those conversations by thanking them for being concerned with my eternal destiny. But I think you're wrong. This is what I think, and this is what the church teaches. This is those kind of things. But as I said, I've gone after those people who come to the door of any denomination and say, I appreciate the fact that you're concerned about me, and let me show you the truth.
Absolutely. I think that's the first big step, because we have the church, founded by Christ, and once you really get in there, that's what you know. And for someone to tell you you're wrong can be difficult. So for your first step, to thank them for coming to you, I think really is tremendous, because they're doing what their notion of God's work is.
That's right.
And we have to remember that we can maybe help guide them to the path of the church, and starts off with that.
Yeah. Slamming a door in their face is not a way to do it.
You're right, you're right. Then we're not being very Christian, are we?
No, because do unto others, would you like the door slammed in your face?
Right.
No, you wouldn't. No.
Right. I found, I don't know if you found, and maybe you can tell me, that the more I know about our faith, the more comfortable I am talking to anybody and hearing their take and responding to that.
Right. It's over time, especially with all the materials at St. Joseph Radio, you know, we've learned. I've learned. I don't always remember. My memory is not the best in the world. I don't remember chapter and verse and whatever, but I do know that there's always an answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing I've learned over and over and over again. Some of the things that different groups use, they're all the same thing. One time I was recording a talk by a famous apologist.
Okay.
And I had my daughter with me, and we afterwards, this is actually a very important point. You know, apologists have this like occupational hazard. They have to be authoritative and show that they know what they're talking about, but they can't be a know-it-all. You know, people. So after one of these talks, I was packing up my camera and my equipment, and one of the people from the audience, congregation, came up to me and said, "Oh, is so-and-so still here? Could you give so-and-so, the speaker, a message for me?" I go, "Yeah, I guess so." And he said, "I would just like to thank him for not talking down to the people that were here." I mean, he treated everybody with respect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so important. So I said, "Oh, you know, you really ought to tell him that yourself." And, "Oh, is he still here?" "Oh, yeah, he was back in the sacristy." So I led him back in the sacristy, and we get there, and the speaker is in a debate with another member of the audience.
Okay.
And they're going back and forth, and it's so impressive. I ran to get my daughter and said, "You got to see this," and it was a great debate. And she came in, and afterwards I asked her what she thought, and she said, "Well, it was really great, Dad, but how did he always know what the other guy was thinking?" And I just told her, you know, the arguments are always the same.
Yes.
After a while, you hear the same arguments over and over and over again. I told her, even I knew what the other guy was thinking. I'm not the expert. So, yeah, but my point there, the real point was the way he talked to the audience set the tone, and he did not turn people off. He encouraged more conversation.
I think what I have to remember, because I'm not bashful about talking about our faith, and I'm not always a real
I know what you mean.
calm guy. I get excited, and that doesn't always lead to good things. But I try to picture my wife, because she came into the church recently, and as I was telling her about Catholic faith, she had lots of questions from a non-Catholic background. And if I can remember the patience that I had with her, with strangers, I think I'd be much better. Because there's nothing I want to do to offend my wife, right?
That's right.
I want to show her all my love. And I think if I can just keep that going to anybody I talk to, would be real good. You know, we're coming to the end. We got just a few minutes. But I really do want to hear one last story regarding our priests and how we should pray for them.
Okay. This story, okay, we don't have much time, do we? Well, let me start by saying one night I was walking out of the church with one of the associates, and he turned to me and said, "Steve, do you pray for your priest?" And I got really smug, and I said, "Yes, Father, every night, Teresa and I, we pray for our priests." And then he says, "Oh, when you pray, what do you pray for?" I go, "Oh, man, I don't know, I'm just praying, you know." So he says, "Well, when you pray for your priests, pray that they have an active prayer life. Because without an active prayer life, this life is very difficult. One minute you're up celebrating a baptism or a marriage, and another minute you're celebrating or officiating at a funeral. It's very tough emotionally." Well, one day I get a call, and we're talking, and this person asked me, how's Father John doing? That's my pastor. I said, well, he's doing okay, but a couple of weeks ago he gave us a real scare. During Mass, he announced he was having trouble catching his breath. So after Mass, one of our friends drove him to an emergency room. Turned out not to be what we were afraid of, but it was a serious issue, but it was treatable. So, so she asked me, well, when did this happen? I couldn't remember exactly. And then she was Divine Mercy Sunday? And I thought for a second, I said, yes, it was. And the reason I could remember is because we were going to have a Divine Mercy chaplet after Mass, and Father was gone to the emergency room, and my wife ended up leading the chaplet. Okay. And so I said, you know, why do you ask? And she says, well, I was over at this other parish, you know, totally different diocese even, and I just felt the need to pray for Father John. And so I go, wow, you know, this is something. God's telling somebody to pray for this priest, my priest actually, at the time he needs it desperately. And I had the pleasure of telling him that somebody had prayed for him. Yeah.
Well, we need to keep those guys in our thoughts always.
Always.
So important for us.
They are Satan's primary target in this battle. So.
Well, Steve, I just want to thank you so much. We've had a great time talking with you, and I think we've given everybody an idea of how to look for God in these moments in our life. I want to thank the audience for staying with us and learning from Steve's life experiences. What a great example of his stories and to look for God in our lives. Thank you for watching St. Joseph Radio in the Rome of the West. I'm Mike Burke. Thank you.